Joining us live from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania is Colin Clarke. He is Director of Research at the Soufan Center, a global intelligence and security consultancy. Colin, I don't recall ever a moment quite like this, where it feels like you're getting almost live diplomacy on two of the biggest conflicts in the world. So on Gaza, Donald Trump, again, not ruling out military action, saying somebody's got to get tougher on Hamas. With that said, I mean, Hamas and Palestinians in Gaza in general just went through 15 months of the most brutal war we've seen recently that landed Israel in court for genocide. I don't know how effective the threat of getting tough can be.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think you're right. We're seeing near real time or real time diplomacy. This is pretty unnerving for a lot of Americans and others in the world who wonder about the policy process that's supposed to accompany major foreign policy pronouncements. We've seen this kind of a whiplash with the tariffs more recently. The announcement of heavy tariffs only a couple of days later to then pull them back. So this back and forth is confusing. It's confusing for America's allies. Really, the only beneficiaries here tend to be America's adversaries. I'd say the Russians are at the top of that list. And you're absolutely right. What other kind of threats of coercion would really compel Hamas at this point to take a different action? Gaza's been completely devastated. When he talks about military force, I'm not so sure he's actually talking about the U.S. I think he's really kind of, if you read between the lines, making a veiled threat on behalf of Israel, that if Hamas doesn't acquiesce to Trump's demands, that he's going to let the Israelis kind of go back into Gaza. But as you've said, what else could they do that they haven't done already?
So Donald Trump says he wants peace and he wants to end the war, but Gaza and Israel were in the middle of a process. It's a ceasefire deal that was there to end the war, and they were moving it. We should be right now in phase 2, which would have seen the release of remaining captives in exchange for Israel withdrawing from the Gaza Strip. And that was supposed to lead to the end of the war, but Israel has pulled out from that.
So that's my concern here, is that by the U.S. Interjecting itself right in the middle of these negotiations and almost usurping the Israeli position, and Trump kind of putting his thumb on the scale here, that it's ultimately going to be counterproductive. He was unhappy with the slow pace of the negotiations. But again, these have been kind of taking place off and on, as you know, for the better part of 15 months, more or less. There's been bits and pieces, kind of fits and starts. And so at this point, to kind of swoop in, make these grand pronouncements, and then back off again is only likely to kind of further progress toward reaching the second phase of this conflict. Or of this deal, rather.
So Donald Trump says he wants to see all the captives, dead and alive, released from the Gaza Strip. Is it fair to say that if Israel had simply followed phase 2 of the ceasefire agreement within 6 weeks, they would have seen exactly that? They would have seen all the captives, dead and alive, released from the Gaza Strip as part of that deal?
Well, those were the terms, right? I mean, those were kind of we always say the devil's in the details. Those were some of the details that took so long, these painstaking negotiations, to work out. So you're absolutely right. At this point, it's kind of muddying the waters a little bit. And again, historically, when you look at negotiations, you look at kind of mediation, the more players involved, the longer it takes for them to come to fruition. And so, especially with the U.S. not really being viewed as an honest broker, given the weapons, the announcement of even more weapons to the Israelis just last week by the Secretary of State. So I am concerned that this is going to derail, the slow but steady progress that's been made. And again, if Trump gets distracted by something else, he's juggling a couple of balls in the air of some really major issues: tariffs, Ukraine. There's several other things going on at the same time. So does he have the bandwidth to stay focused on this and see it through to the end? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, let's pivot to Ukraine-Russia, the Ukraine-Russia war there for a second. So I don't know if you heard that. I put this very same question to Mike Hanna, a reporter in Washington. Donald Trump said that Russia, in a way that is different from Ukraine, but in its own way also has no choice but to end the war for reasons, quote, that only I know. That's Donald Trump speaking. Reasons that only I know. As an analyst, when you hear something like that, I just wonder, What do you think? Do you think there's really some big mystery out there that, has not been made public? We're not privy to it? Or do you think this is like the Donald Trump hyperbole and kind of bending the truth and theater that he's got us accustomed to?
Well, it certainly would fall in line with previous kind of hyperbolic statements. I'll be honest, my initial reaction was typical Trump. He often inflates reality or distorts it in some ways. But if he is telling the truth, it does make you wonder what exactly he's referencing. My first hunch was that he's got information about the precarious state of the Russian economy that maybe others aren't privy to, and that actually the sanctions that have been in place for the better part of the last several years are having much more of an impact than everybody realizes. Although there's been some pretty good open source reporting on how badly this is hurting the Russians, how much longer they can sustain kind of trying to survive under the crushing weight of these sanctions. So it could be an allusion to that. We just don't know, and I'm not sure that we'll actually ever find out.
So the next step in this is the Americans are going to meet the Ukrainians in Saudi Arabia. As a reminder, they had begun talks with Russians last time, also in Saudi Arabia. Do you feel that they're maybe pivoting a little bit to Ukraine? Is it a step in Ukraine's direction or not necessarily?
Again, the pace of current events really is almost taking place minute by minute, hour by hour. I kind of go to sleep thinking, one thing is happening, and then I wake up in the morning and it's almost a 180-degree reversal. So it's hard to say. A lot of people chalk this up to Trump's negotiating style, the tactics that he uses. He takes a maximalist position and then kind of edges back toward the end. And whatever concessions are extracted, he says, look, that's because of my, agile negotiating skill. I will say, you have to give credit to Trump for following through on what he does, threaten. And so we saw that with the withdrawal of aid, now kind of holding back intelligence to Ukraine, which for someone that's so concerned about saving lives, that kind of cuts in the opposite direction. There's going to be many more Ukrainians that die as the result of intelligence not being shared. It's really just kind of trial by fire. Every day is something different. And it's probably one of the most incoherent approaches I've seen to foreign policy in a long time. Doesn't mean that it won't be successful. It's just not the traditional style that we're used to with a policy process, with vetting, with listening to kind of outside experts. It's a lot more of what I'd call an adhocracy, fly by the seat of your pants, Trump kind of deciding one thing and then moving forward full speed ahead.
Okay, Colin Clarke. Actually, that last point's really interesting. I mean, they all were, but that last point I'll keep in mind. It's that it's fly by the seat of your pants, but it doesn't mean it won't be successful. Colin Clarke, thank you very much for joining us on the Al Jazeera NewsHour.
Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.